Well, I guess it's time y'all knew more about us Yanceys.
The story of the Yanceys is a story that is dying to be told. Most people would start by talking about the Glyndor Rebellion, led by Owain Glyndor, a nobleman who declared himself Prince of Wales. The revolt began with raids on English border towns and quickly spread, leading to a national conflict marked by battles, sieges, and alliances with France. While the rebellion was eventually suppressed, it was a significant event that fostered a lasting sense of Welsh national identity and pride. But none of that has anything to do with Sir Thornton B. Yancy, a former Templar knight, now a successful fisherman. When the revolt started, Yancy's mind was very clear on the matter. He had dedicated his life to God and thus to peace. Yancy had always been a stern column of a man when he was a knight, but the years of working the cold North Irish Sea had seasoned him into a man of abnormal resolve. And in that resolve, the true story of the Yanceys lies. Yancy's success had garnered him the responsibility of being the spokesperson for his village. He had spoken to his people, and since he had always brought them success and prosperity, they all agreed with his stance. The first thing that happened was the local lord, who had declared himself Prince of Wales, called for support from all his liege men. Since Yancy was not such a man, and their village was not on the map, the village went about its business. Then the edicts came, one from the King of England, and one from the Prince of Wales, both declaring the tiny fishing hamlet as their own, both demanding taxes and men. The villagers were not surprised or frightened, because unbeknownst to most, the vast majority of the villagers were also former Templar knights who had heard about the village and settled here decades earlier. All had adopted the fishing life, and all were pillars of men like their leader. The sons and daughters of these men were no different. They immediately fortified the outskirts of the small village using natural choke points, where 20 men could inflict serious damage on hundreds, while their attackers would be helpless to stop it. Their only real concern was their waterfront. They chained the harbor and secretly placed 3 large groups of dinghies and rowboats on the other side of the chain. One was disguised as a small debris island, and the other 2 looked like small bits of land jutting off the rocks. The envoy from the Prince of Wales was the first to arrive at the choke point.
He's no king here!
Of battles raging elsewhere was whispered among the womenfolk. Then the British came. The British envoy was a knight. When he was asked to read the 2 edicts, he did so without complaint. He then asked to speak to their leader. Sir Yancy stepped forward with fist to chest.
I honor you, Sir Knight. I am a former knight, Sir Yancy, but here I am only Thornton. As you can see, no man can serve 2 kings.
Right you are, Sir Knight, and bedeviled the man who asks him to do so.
I shall trouble you no more, but I do not speak for my king.
Good luck, Sir Knight.
And with that, he too galloped away from the choke point. The following month saw a few skirmishes from both sides with no success. In fact, the Brits had lost 2 boats full of goods and supplies that were moored near the Fake. Camouflaged Debris Island, the village maintained its decorum, and the young men and women trained daily for a coming war. It was basically one small village against the world. As the attacks intensified, the Prince of Wales quickly recognized the infamous, entrenched stubbornness that Welshmen were known for, and thought it wise to leave the village be. Besides, they were killing Brits, and that was fine too.
Why are we wasting time and manpower on those stubborn
Brits,
arses?
on the other hand, under King Henry thy Feast, were determined to focus their entire campaign on the taking of a small fishing village. It was to be his biggest symbol of victory. As the revolt dragged on, the king's obsession with one small fishing village caused the rebellion to go on for years. After almost 12 years had passed when the king's commanders decided to wage the real war against the revolt behind his back.
Why are we wasting time and manpower on those stubborn arses? Move all forces to more important targets.
The results were the end of a 15-year-old revolt. and the creation of the Yancy legend. The revolt was easily subdued once the decisions were being made by the right people. The king had his personal war to fight in a small village that no one cared about but him, and it was this distraction that eventually led to his downfall. You see, the king had never gone to the little forgotten fishing village. He didn't even know where it actually was. His commanders had stopped sending young knights to die there a year or so earlier. Whenever the king inquired of the village, his commanders told him that all was going as he wanted.
What of this village near the river, Sir Richard? Is the Welsh resistance broken?
Yes, Your Majesty.
And soon he would be victorious. Now, the little village was ignored by both sides, and true to form, the village had profited greatly from both. The Welsh prince was vanquished, the revolt was crushed, and that was that. However, few knew that the little village was quietly removed from any of the ledgers or manuscripts pertaining to any battles there. The king was paraded through some anonymous fishing village in Wales, and none were the wiser. The small village, on the other hand, always maintained its strong, independent stance. As far as the crown knew, it was a small independent business, holding with which the crown was welcome to do business. In the coming decade, the wind was changing politically in England, and the small fishing village held a secret that few knew, a secret that could make or break a king. By now, the village was composed of hardened Templar knight, trained fishermen who had only known freedom, knowing that the new king must never let it be known that they had lied to his predecessor. The Templars had seen what happens when you are caught between two great powers. Their order was decimated because of it. Fortunately, for the village, the new king was distracted by the news of the discovery of the Americas. All the European kings and queens were falling over themselves to send ships to plunder the new land, and England was no different. Taxes were levied, and ships were built. This was the beginning of what would one day become the most powerful navy in the world. Under Yancy leadership, the little village remained aloof, and it stayed that way by contributing greatly to the king's pet project. In fact, they themselves were commissioning a ship to make the journey as an independent fishing venture in 1733, as Oglethorpe deboarded the frigate Anne and led 18 new settlers into what was later to become Georgia, a young Thaddeus B. Yancy was among them. Trailing the Anne was a small, sleekly drafted ship that anchored offshore. During the evening, young Yancy rowed out and boarded the ship. Few noticed, but in the black of night, 8 similar ships had joined the first, and they silently sailed away. The small fishing village had commissioned 9 seaworthy vessels and moved its entire population to the New World, leaving only those behind who were too weak for the trip. After sailing up a waterway inlet, the expedition chose to build their settlement in a very inaccessible area. Their ships were disassembled as planned to build fortifications and shelters. Fishing was plentiful. However, the land was swampy and reminded them of the marshes back home. The village grew, and like any settlement of this time, there were setbacks and hardships, but these were descendants of very strong-willed people, so they persevered. They fought off native attacks and attacks from French and Spanish settlers over and over, until all decided that they were best left alone. By now, Georgia, which had started out as mostly a convict settlement, had become the king's favorite child because of its agricultural power fueled by slavery. In return for his favor, Georgians called themselves Tories, or the king's men. The Yancy folk not only found slavery to be inhumane and disgusting, but found the worship of a man to be an abomination. The fact that they existed on the frontier of his settlement didn't bother the king at all. He wanted them right where they were. The king was aware of their fierceness and knew that they would, by their nature, eventually secure his northern flank. He gave them the same independent business enterprise designation as in Wales, and the settlement was left to its own devices. The American Revolution came, as anyone could see coming, and Georgia became the hub for the British Navy. The independent holding, now known as Yancy Township, knew what was coming next. Their location was strategic and offered either side an advantage to control it. The settlement's newest leader was also the first American-born Yancy and was as hard-packed as the red dirt he stood upon. He was more jovial than most Yancy folk. But make no mistake, he was a Yancy. He spat out a chunk of chewed-up sugar cane, smiled, and said,
"Well, damn, nobody wants a king, and shooting is about to start. Everybody's mad again, but we ain't having one bit of it." "Well, damn, I totally understand. Them people don't want no king. Hell, we don't want no king."
And with that, he had the narrowest point in the river logged.
There are no rebel ships in Tory country to blockade, but what we will do is make sure no British ship can go through either.
During the following years, the township would report sunken rebel ships to the king. Its representatives, no British ships, sailed up the Narrows. When the war ended, during the Treaty of Paris, the question of previous agreements with local tribes and principalities came up. Most felt that the new nation should work out its own agreements with the tribes, as was their right. The debate got heated. Then the French representative pointed out that if the tribes sensed weakness or thought that the white man was going back on his word, the new nation could be under attack before it could stand on its own 2 feet. The decision was made to allow all previous agreements to remain in place until further notice. That decision was challenged several times over the decades, and many of the treaties with the tribes were broken or rewritten, but Yancy Township was never touched. Over time, people forgot that they were never a part of any nation. The new state of Georgia annexed most of the land around the principality, and by 1824, not only was there a Yancy in the United States Senate, but the lieutenant governor of the state was his son. It was during this time that the lieutenant governor, Hiram B. Yancy, introduced legislation that made Yancy Township a historic holding that was to be protected and remain unchanged and independent. He also tasked the Yancy, as in all their offspring, with its custodianship. This is when he created the founding charter of Yancy in 1824. The charter was ratified later in 1825 after the disastrous and scandalous treaty with the Creek people of Indian Springs. It was blatant land thievery by the then Georgia governor. Yancy County Township has a tiny portion of its land annexed to be designated as a state of Georgia Indian Land Office that eventually grew into what is now known as red dirt. The Yancys had always seen their neighbors as Tories, so their disdain for such people was very obvious. In fact, there's an old Yancy saying that went, "I'd rather sleep in dog shit than sleep with a Tory." They were very literal people. Everyone in Georgia knew how they felt, and their reputation for being best left alone wasn't wasted on them either. For the most part, they were left as the Civil War raged around them, and none passed through their land. Seth B. Yancy, the Georgia senator, had married a wealthy New Yorker and stayed north. After the war, the Yancy Township issue was visited again, but was shot down in the Senate by supporters of Hiram B. Yancy, who had always voted with the Union during the war. He knew his family could be in danger, but he was always steadfast, never wavering.
We must honor those who have stood with us, even at great peril to themselves and loved ones. Here.
As all great families do, they went through ups and downs as the world changed around them. They tried to remain true to their traditions. Most, if not all, of the males went military, as did many of the females. Most people said that they carried the Yancy warrior spirit. Other Yanceys chose the path of the politician, and most were good at it. Some would say they made just as good a politician as they made a warrior, and this too had been proven time after time. With all this being said, however, the true legend is the original Buckler B. Yancy, aka Uncle Buck, the Army sergeant, who wasn't satisfied with just pissing on the side of a known racist tent. He thought driving a Jeep over it was better. The same guy that came home and cleaned red dirt of racist filth that had settled nearby while he was gone. But with all that he was, and the grandeur that accompanied him, he brought the family to ruin. And that's why they retreated from public life.
Well, now you know as much about the Yanceys as anybody, I reckon. It's an old story. Old story. As far as my Uncle Buck is concerned, let's just say love is very powerful and leave it at that.